Hello, ECE 140. Today's lecture is going to be about Chapter 6, the 4-year-old, okay? Chapter 6 and ages of stages for the 4-year-old. So let's start with the social emotional development of a typically developing 4-year-old. The book describes 4-year-olds as being out of bounds, okay? With their emotional and social development out of bounds. What that means is they do everything big and extreme. If anybody's ever worked with 4-year-olds or have 4-year-olds, you know that they talk loud, they talk a lot, they often, play big, they want to take risks. So out of bounds, I think, is a pretty accurate way of describing the social emotional development of a 4-year-old. Yeah, they have big emotions both ways, happy and sad, and oftentimes as the adult caregivers, they need our help to help them navigate those big emotions when they're seen as what might seem not realistic to us or overreacting. You have to remember that they're still figuring out how to regulate their emotions and how to respond appropriately. And so it's important for us to know that it is appropriate developmentally for children to react big when they get mad or sad or frustrated. And they need our help to acknowledge those emotions as being, real and they matter, and then helping them navigate appropriate ways to respond. Their friendships, a 4-year-old's friendships, they do start to develop stronger, more consistent friendships. Their friendships typically, though, are who they're playing with, or not typically, but sometimes are who they're playing with, and they use the promise of friendship kind of as a tool. The idea that if you don't play with me, you're not my friend. If you play with them, you're not my friend. That promise of friendship, if you give me that snack, I'll be your friend. That peer connection is very important to them. And so you'll start to see them using it to kind of negotiate and even kind of manipulate each other. I think that is, and the book even talks about that being a typical behavior, and I think for the most part we should let them work it out on their own. I think that we can help children know that they don't have to give in or give their snack or whatever the promise of friendship is being used with, and that they'll be okay, there'll be other friends to play with, you'll play with them. So just know that is typical for 4-year-olds. And again, if you remember, I said that being a friend is not a skill we're created with, and so they need us to help navigate that and negotiate that and model that, and definitely not punished for the process that they're taking to figure it out, right? They need us to help them, like I said, navigate it and give them the right words and connect feelings. You can say to a friend that, when you told him that you weren't his friend, that hurt him. You can tell him that you don't want to play with him. You can tell him, that you're mad at him. But maybe not use words that would hurt him. So again, it's a kind of a balance, because you don't want to force children to be friends, and at the same time, you also want to develop their moral character and know that their words, start to help them connect that their words do hurt people, because that is a difficult thing. 4-year-olds are starting to understand that, but they're still incredibly egocentric. So it's something that they need our help with. They also, 4-year-olds have an all or nothing way of thinking that kind of goes along lines with those out of bounds and how they're friends with each other. You know, if you are their friend, you're not my friend. If you don't play my way, I won't play with you. Groups of 3 still can be really difficult for them because of that possessiveness, that egocentrism. The book talks about if you hear children excluding others, then, you know, depending on why they're excluding, there might be times where we need to step in and model. If they're excluding based on anything that has to do with their identity, it is our responsibility to step in if they're excluding on skin color, gender, nationality, and really talk about how that feels and how that's not appropriate, and it's not an acceptable way, a reason in our program or your program or in your class to tell someone that they can't play with you. There's a lot of children's books that you can also, if you see that happening, to kind of incorporate and initiate discussions for them. All right. Sharing, we talked about that last lecture. Sharing is still very difficult. Okay, remember, children are egocentric until they're 6 or 7. I do know in personal experience, if they have been given the opportunity to take turns and not forced to share in their earlier years, that it's not that much of an issue when they're 4, because at this point they know that they're not going to be forced to give up their toys. They know that their friends aren't going to be forced to give up their toys, and so they're more willing and able and capable of waiting their turn. So I encourage you to know that sharing, forcing children to share, is not only developmentally inappropriate, but also it's not teaching them to share. You're actually teaching them not to share when you force it. And so we should be modeling and encouraging children to take turns. All right. Some of the typical behavior issues that we see for 4-year-olds are, again, they are out of bounds. And so they often will respond big. Typically, if they are responding with physical behavior or what seems to be aggressive behavior, and it is important to remember that aggressive behavior looks often different for boys and girls. For boys, it's typically physical. For girls, it's the use of words. Again, that's typical, okay? That's not every child. It's not, you know, gender stereotyping, but that's typically what we see, but it could go either way. But both are an issue of power. Both are trying to either gain power back or assert power on others. And we should never be okay with hurting someone. You know, I do believe that, and the research talks about, children will only learn how to resolve conflict in healthy ways if they're being given opportunities to practice resolving conflict. So we should not be stepping in every time they're fighting over something with words, or fighting over, unless they're fighting with words and they're saying hurtful things, or they're hurting each other. Okay, so if they're just arguing, if they're just screaming at each other, if they're, you know, fighting over an object, unless they're going to damage that object, then we should give them the opportunity to work it out. I remember once, I mean, I've had a million of these, but I remember once in particular, 2 4-year-olds were fighting over a swing. and they were both pulling on it. And I knew that they couldn't hurt the swing, but they were screaming at each other. There were tears, and I stood very close and I did not intervene. Every once in a while, I reminded them, you know, I'm not going to let you hurt each other. If I thought I saw a hand being raised, or if it was going to get to that, but I really let them work it out. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to work it out. Sometimes you can facilitate and help them use words and say, do you want to tell Jenny how you feel? Do you want to, tell Johnny you had it first? You can help navigate that. But I do believe strongly that we should be giving children many, many opportunities to resolve conflict on their own. It is okay that children don't get their way all the time. It is absolutely necessary and okay that children learn that someone else is going to get it. They're going to win, and I'm not. And they'll be okay. There's other things to do. There's other things to play with. You can even be upset and be in that emotion. Totally acknowledge that. What's not okay, and the book talks about bottom line rules. We have to step in when they're hurting each other, hurting themselves, or hurting property. That is when we absolutely need to step in. Again, not punish. We should always be doing it in a way that makes it a teachable moment, right? Our job should not be to just stop conflict, right? Or assert our power, right? Just taking the things away and saying, if you guys aren't going to get along, no one gets to play with it. What does that teach them, right? That if they have conflict, they're not going to be able to play anymore. That doesn't teach conflict resolution, right? If they're hurting the toy or material, then you can say, I understand you both want to play with it, but because you're damaging it, I can't let you play with it. That's very different than if you fight, you can't play, right? I think we need to, when they're hurting each other, when they're hurting property, if they're hurting themselves, remember, hurting each other is with words and physically, we should definitely step in. We must first let children know that their feelings are legitimate, but their actions are not. I see you're mad because he took your toy. I see you're upset because she said you weren't her friend. Okay, I know you're angry, but I cannot let you hurt her. Okay, I see you're angry. I'd be angry too, but I will not let you hurt him. Okay, I will not let you throw that against the wall or whatever it is. And then give them an opportunity. All right. Oftentimes, there's so many reasons why a child could be consistently using aggressive behavior, but it's almost always an issue of power, like I said earlier. And our job is to find out the whys. Why is it that those behaviors are happening? Do they have a lack of developing personal power in other areas of their life? Do they have older siblings that they don't have an opportunity to exhibit any power, and so when they come to school they have to do it here? Do they not feel seen, heard? There's a lot of reasons, and I think that it's our job to find out the whys. Like I said before, Bev Boss says change the environment, not the child. And so we need to find out what's going on possibly that's leading to those behaviors. Wanted to just talk for just a brief minute about bullying and teasing. The term bullying is used a lot lately, and rightfully so in most cases. I think it's important for us to understand that it's very seldom that we actually see bullying in early childhood. Okay, bullying is not quite the same as the aggressive behavior that I've been talking about that we typically see. Bullying is a intentional targeting okay? Typically someone with shaky self-esteem or someone that's weaker than them, and ongoing, consistent asserting or maintaining their power over them, okay? So it's targeting, it's consistent, right? Teasing also is a way of bullying, but there's a difference between kind of those out of bounds or using friendship as a way of, you know, manipulating friends. But when you are constantly teasing someone to assert your power, ongoing, targeted, that is a type of bullying, and we can't allow that. That has to be some of our bottom line rules. We will step in and we will let children know that that will not be allowed here. You know, I've had to tell children that you're going to need to stay by me today because I can't trust that you're not going to hurt my friends with your words. Right? I can't let you play with them today, because when you do, you hurt them with your words. It hurts their heart. So we do need to step in when that happens, but I also really want you to consider the difference between, you know, typical behavior issues and bullying and teasing. There is a difference, and we want to be careful not to label children as bullies. That can stay with them, right? That can really target them and stay with them. So I want you to be aware of the difference, all right? The other thing that we see a lot for 4-year-olds is this beginning of inappropriate language or swear words. The book actually uses bathroom words, which I think, I'm not a fan of that. I don't know what that means, that you only use the words in the bathroom. But what I want to say about that is, you know, you have to make decisions for your program or your classroom that you're comfortable with, that are your kind of bottom line rules when it comes to that. And there are words that should not be acceptable, especially if they go along with bullying and teasing, if they're targeting children on their identity, their race, their culture. You know, any of those things, those should absolutely not be acceptable, and you need to explain why. And then possible consequences, like I talked about earlier. I can't let you play with them because you said this word to her and that hurts her. I can't let that happen. But I also want to be kept aware, want us to remember that playing with words is part of being a 4-year-old. And using words that you think are going to get a rise out of someone or cause someone to laugh, that happens in 4-year-olds. I want us to be very careful out of respect for different children's different home lives, that we don't label words as bad or good, okay? There aren't good words and bad words. There's just words. There's words that are appropriate. There's words that aren't appropriate. There are words that you will allow them to use. There are words that you won't allow them to use, okay? You can't, in my opinion, label words as good and bad, because their definition at home for good and bad might be completely different, okay? So you can absolutely decide for your classroom, for your environment, what words are allowed or not. But it can be very confusing and actually affect their trust in you if you tell them that saying shit or the F word is a bad word, and then they go home and their parents use it. And they're allowed to use it because they're adults, right? And so I want us to remember that we want to be respectful that other households have different rules for the language that they use. And so I would really encourage you to kind of reframe what's appropriate and not appropriate, instead of using bad words and good words. All right, I hope that that makes sense. Anything else for this? Lying also, you'll start to see for 4-year-olds, they can come almost like the book says, some really great whoppers. I think that we see this a lot because children probably have seen it, or they create this picture of what they think you want to hear, or what they think will keep them from being in trouble, and then it becomes the image of their head, and that's what's their truth, right? You're not going to win an argument with a 4-year-old about them lying, okay? If you can finally get them to say, you know, if they walk up to you and they have chocolate on their face and you say, you ate that chocolate, and they said, no, I didn't eat the chocolate, you can argue with them for hours and they will stick to their guns because they've created this image in their head of their story. And then it's, you know, because remember, they don't think abstractly, right? And so if at some point you do finally get them to say, I ate the chocolate, it's almost always because you've forced it and they don't want to be in trouble anymore, right? And that's not actually teaching them about making up stories and telling you what really happened, right? So, and the book talks about, and I encourage you to not put more emphasis or drama on them telling stories or lying than it needs to be, because the more you do it, the more you make of it, the more they're likely to do it. I mean, it just is the way 4-year-olds work. I would encourage you to not get sucked into that, to acknowledge, I hear that you're saying you didn't eat the chocolate. I hear you. I hear that you believe that. I know you did. I see it on your face. And now you're not going to get any chocolate after dinner. And they're going to freak out and they're going to say, I didn't. I hear you. I heard you. I believe you did. And because I see that I believe you did, you're not going to get chocolate on your face. And they're going to throw a fit, and that's fine. Let them. Okay? They're out of bounds. That's a real emotion. What you need to do is stay calm, be consistent, right? And just be matter of fact, right? Don't take on their emotions, because that's not going to help anybody, right? And then at another time later, when they're not in that moment, you can have a conversation with them and see if you can kind of help them realize that what they said to you was a story and not what really happened, and that it's important that everybody's honest with each other. And then as they get older, it becomes a different thing, right? When they become more abstract thinkers, then the lying takes on a different role. But at 4 years old, it is not a like a hindsight of like future pathology. It doesn't mean they're going to be like dishonest people or, you know, liars for the rest of their life. It is exactly what, you know, for the most part, what I said already. All right. All right, let's move on to, oh, no apologies. So, you know, it's incredibly important, I think, that we are encouraging children to tell the truth, right? I think everybody would agree with that. I think it's also important for us to remember that children are egocentric, right? All the way up until they're 6 or 7. And remember that being egocentric means that they don't understand that other children, other people have other points of view. They don't understand that their actions, like they don't understand the fullness of what their actions cause in other people, right? That's why they couldn't possibly understand that when they lie, it makes you not trust them, or it makes you sad. They can't make those connections yet. And so when we force children to say, I'm sorry, we are forcing them to lie at all ages, okay? Especially 2s and 3s, and yes, 4-year-olds, right? Because the definition of saying I'm sorry, or the motivation for saying I'm sorry, is to help the other person feel better, right? to let the other person know you regret that. 4-year-olds don't have that capability yet. They don't have that capability yet. So those words are empty, okay? Those are just words that you're forcing them to say so they stay out of trouble, okay? If we want children to develop a sense of empathy, of understanding, right? Be on the road to understanding that their actions actually affect other people, then we have to make those connections. We have to connect the emotion to what they did. And not in punitive ways, not in ways that they're getting punished, but in teachable moments, right? So forcing children to say, I'm sorry, what almost always happens, right? Sorry. Or I'm sorry, I'm sorry, so that they can get out of trouble, right? There's no emotional connection to that, okay? What they need us to doing is make those connections for them. As they get a little bit older, we can ask them if they want to apologize, right? We can say, you know, do you want to say I'm sorry? You can apologize yourself. Model that. I'm so sorry you got hurt. I'm so sorry that Jamie hit you. That looks like it hurt. I'm so sorry that that Johnny took your toy. That made you really mad. I'm so sorry that happened to you. So we can totally model it. But forcing apologies in early childhood does not teach children to be sorry, does not teach children empathy. It actually does the opposite, right? Because you're not making connections, right? You're setting a foundation for those words to be empty, for those words to be a way of getting out of trouble instead of actually taking accountability for actions, okay? That's also on page 157 if you want to read a little bit more about that. All right, let's move on to gross motor development. So the big thing for 4-year-olds, there's not a lot of difference between the 3 and 4-year-olds. 4-year-olds can pretty much do anything they want to do physically. Climb well, run well, jump well, throw well, carry things. They're incredibly capable at 4 years old. What they need is opportunities and space to move and be active. They need lots of outdoor time, okay? They're out of bounds, right? In all areas, right? So they need to space and time and materials to do things big, climb high, carry things that are heavy, right? Play big. What often happens right around this age is the labeling, right? I hear it often, not as much as I used to because of the environment that I provide, but still occasionally in my school, do you think so-and-so's got ADHD? You know, they don't want to sit and do writing activities. You know, they're just so active. They're just moving around all the time. That's exactly what 4-year-olds are supposed to be doing, right? Most 4-year-olds don't want to sit and do a lesson, or physically can't sit for long periods of time. That's absolutely typically appropriate. Y'all, it is developmentally inappropriate to expect a 4-year-old to sit for 20 minutes at a circle time. Absolutely, some children can do it. That doesn't mean they should do it. And the ones that can't do it, that's absolutely developmentally appropriate. And we end up labeling them or disciplining them and making them feel bad for exactly what they're supposed to be doing, which is be active, move their bodies. Y'all, if we don't let them do it now, right, then they're going to have a hard time later on sitting still, focusing, okay? You don't teach a child to focus by forcing them to focus at an early age. And you give them free time to choose activities, to choose how they want to play. And then they stay focused, right? If you were to look at the middle picture, right? They tried like 5 different things to get that little boy up the slide, working as a team, negotiating, right? The language, the problem solving, right? And that opportunity for them to also use their gross motor skills, right? They worked on that for almost an hour, okay? And the one to the right, they're creating something with those logs, right? So they're using their large muscles, they're developing gross motor skills, and also focusing on a goal, working together, right? That doesn't happen when they only have 20 minutes to play freely, especially if that's 20 minutes outside time, 30 minutes out time, right? Okay. For fine motor skills, they're very skillful at using their hands. They can pretty much do, again, anything they want to, right? They can button, they can unbutton, they can zip, you know, they can cut well. They can use manipulatives well. They actually really love to use manipulatives. What they shouldn't be doing is mandated writing activities, right? Again, remember that these are the last muscles to develop, right? These develop before these, right? So gross motor development, that should be given a lot of time, right? And then allow materials in their environment for them to use these muscles, right? Scissors, you know, manipulatives, lacing, tweezers. They also love to be helpful, and they can do almost anything, right? And it helps their social emotional development if they do feel useful and helpful, and they can help you in the kitchen or help you in the garage, help you with yard work, right? Help you make a grocery list, help you do those kind of things that help them not only feel useful, but feel important, okay? So the language development, you know, typically at age 4, typically at age 4, uh-oh, what happened? Oh, sorry. Typically at age 4, we talked a little bit about their language and it being, you know, also out of bounds and them wanting to play with words. They love and want to be silly and expand their language and exaggerate their language and talk loud, play loud, scream. You know, they love things like Anna Banana, Faux Fi Fana, those playing with the words. It is also developmentally inappropriate to expect children to be quiet during their play because they should be able to play loud just like we do. 4-year-olds can sustain play for long periods of time, okay? If they're given opportunities to play in the actual definition of play, which is part of your group project, right? Is it their choice, right? Do they get to choose how they use the materials, how long they use the materials, what materials, okay? Is it fun? Is it self-directed? Okay. All of those characteristics that you should be researching. Then they can play for literally hours, you guys, hours with very little conflict. Stuttering still might be an issue. We talked about that with the 3-year-old. We do want to remember not to correct them, to be patient, allow them to work it out. That's the only way that their brain and their mouth are going to start working together. Anybody who's had a 4-year-old or worked with 4-year-olds knows this is definitely the age of why, where we get questions like, why? Why do you have to stop at a red light? Why does the sun fall? Why? And remember that all or nothing. If you tell them that you know, the light is red because it tells you to stop, and then you even remotely go before the light turns green, or, you know, don't follow that rule, they're going to be like, you broke the law, you broke the rules, because it's that all or nothing. We can help their language still by offering open-ended questions, by expanding on their thoughts. Dictating stories is a great way to help them not only expand their language, but to see their language translated to print, which is pre-reading. And so a lot of times at our school, what we do is we have clipboards all over, and we got this idea from Bev Boss. And we'll just sit down next to them, depending on what they're doing, because we don't want to interrupt their play, and say, how does your story go? And then if they want to tell a story, we just write. We write everything that they say. Sometimes it's just a few words. Sometimes it's a few sentences. And sometimes you need to buckle in because it's a whole story. And you just write. And then you can ask them, can I share this? And then at a story time, or even right there, you can read it out loud. And it's very empowering for them, right? It helps their self-esteem. But it really also helps see that their words, like when they see words on a paper, that's actually someone's language. That's words turned into print, okay? So dictating stories is a great way to help children in their language development. So we already talked about why questions, stages of whys. I think the only other thing I would add is that it is important that we respond to them in ways that are developmentally appropriate, that are within their developmental range. 4-year-olds have such an amazing imagination, amazing imagination. I don't know if the book says this, but it has been said that the 4-year-olds live in dramatic play. Like the 4-year-old is a year of dramatic play, which is so fantastic, right? I think that we should honor that. We should opportunities for them to explore that. Again, long periods of time allows for that to happen, for them to create their own play, right? Create and explore and live out their imagination. The academic concepts that we talked about in the 3-year-old lecture is the same. How they learn to play is the same. They still need to use active learning. They still need to use their senses. We have to remember that because they're not abstract thinkers, concepts like time is still way outside of their range, way outside of their ability of their brain to comprehend. They can recite days of the week if it's something that they hear all the time. But if you tell them that they're going to Disneyland on Wednesday and it's Friday, every day they're going to ask you if it's Wednesday, right? They do start to understand schedules more, like consistency. So they start to understand and look for, and for some kids it becomes very important that the schedules are consistent. So they start to understand, you know, towards the end of the morning when they see the teacher starting to, you know, maybe put things away, or, you know, they understand that they're going to have breakfast and then play, and then have lunch, and then after nap time their mom's going to come, or, you know, those consistent schedules, they start to develop a frame of reference for that. Some of the academic concepts that you see is a more complex level of sorting. You'll start to see them sort things by more characteristics, like things that are alike and things that are different. Sequencing, which kind of goes back to that schedule. They can start sequencing things, ordering little to big, light to dark, light to heavy, those type of sorting things. Again, these are not things that we need to teach them. When children have the opportunity to play with loose pieces, these things happen, right? You'll start to see them put things in different orders, light to dark, light to heavy, which is volume, little to big, sorting things by different characteristics. Okay, again, those happen in their play. Let's talk about dramatic play for just a little bit. I hope that you have been reading the chapters and really going into dramatic play, because it really is, like I've said before, an underappreciated and underrespected type of play in early childhood, but is so incredibly important. Okay, dramatic play is so connected to social emotional development, and cognitive development, because you're recreating things in your life or pictures that you've seen, right, or created, or things that you've seen in your life and you're recreating them. That's a huge cognitive ability that children get to practice, okay? So let me just read this really quickly, okay? The advantages of pretend play with other children in dramatic play. In the give and take without adult intervention, children sort out who they are and how to get along with others, okay? A child with a rich experience in dramatic play develops flexibility in thinking. They're better able to cope with change and stress later on in their life, right? They're able to gain control of their fears, okay? When children are able to create props for their play, they're creating and using their own symbols, which translates to reading later on, okay? Dramatic play is incredibly important for all areas of development, okay? So for stages of play, okay, we talked a little bit in the 3-year-old about moving from parallel to associative. They're now moving from associative play into cooperative play, okay? Cooperative play in their late 4-year-old and in a 5-year-old is where they're starting to cooperate more, where they're collectively making rules for their play, where they're collectively assigning roles, where they're as a group, as they're cooperating in planning the play, okay? So that's in their language and where they are cognitively, and their imagination allows them to be in cooperative play, all right? So it is more with each other, planning, negotiating, making rules. That doesn't happen in associative play. That's really still hard for 3-year-olds. But a older 4-year-old can really be in cooperative play, all right? So just to recap, the stages of play, right? We started in infancy with onlooker play, which children can engage in onlooker play throughout, but in the infancy, we only see onlooker play. And then in toddlers, we see solitary play, right? Onlooker play and solitary play, but definitely solitary play, where they're playing next to each other, but not with each other. They're not really even, they can't even like play with the same materials very well. And then they go into parallel play, where they might be using the same materials next to each other, talking out loud, but not with each other. Even playing with the same materials can be hard for them. And that's 2-year-olds in parallel play. And then the 3-year-olds are in associative play, right? So they might be playing with the same materials. They might even be playing the same way, but they're not planning, they're not negotiating, they're not assigning roles. Assigning roles is really hard for a 3-year-old because everybody wants to be Spider-Man or everybody wants to be the mom. And then now we go into cooperative play, and cooperative play is into the younger elementary age, all right? Important for us to know that there's been a lot of research about how important it is that children need uninterrupted stretches of time to play, and I've talked about that quite a bit already, just a few minutes ago, and through every lecture. But you know, there is research that shows that 4-year-olds need 45 minutes just to plan their play, just to fully develop what their plan is going to be. So if you think about that in regards to if anybody cooks or bakes, okay? What's the first thing you do when you cook or bake? You set up, right? You look at your recipe, you get all your ingredients out, right? My son, who is a trained chef, it's called mise en place, which is all of the pre-planning, right? That takes almost as much time sometimes to do the actual cooking, right? Or if you're a crafter or a scrapbooker, right? You have to get out all your materials, decide what you're going to work on, right? And sometimes that takes as much time as the actual doing the craft, okay? Children play the same way, okay? Sometimes typically it takes 45 minutes just to plan their play, to set it up, to negotiate the roles, right? And then they're in deep play. And sometimes that play doesn't last very long and they recreate it and then they set up something else and they need time, right? So if we're only giving children 30 minutes or 45 minutes or God, even less 20 minutes, we're not giving them opportunities for full child development, for optimum cognitive development, okay? We're definitely not giving them opportunities to develop the ability to focus, hold their attention to things, if their play is broken up into small segments of time, okay? They need uninterrupted stretches of time to fully develop their play and then be deep in their play. All right, block play. So again, hopefully you've been reading the chapters and learning how important block play is in their development. The book talks about block play offering a great deal of language skill. It helps in their imaginative play. It helps in understanding shapes, size, numbers, similarities, differences, okay? It is a great opportunity for them to have start to develop cooperative play with other children, okay? So there's a lot of learning integrated into block play, okay? Block play, just like dramatic play, provides opportunities for whole child development, okay? Creative play also. The only thing that I'm going to add about creative play that I've said before is that we still should not be giving them predetermined craft projects, okay? They need process, okay? They need materials, a variety of materials, different materials often, and then how they use the materials should be up to them, okay? It should be up to them. It should be about the process over the product. The learning is in the process, not in something that everybody's looks the same and you get to put it on the bulletin board. That is not creativity, okay? That is something else. I'm not sure why games is up there. I believe that should be in the 5-year-old, so I'm going to not talk about that. Because board games and stuff like that is still kind of hard for a 4-year-old because of their egocentric and they can't think abstractly, and so they're going to want to win all the time. But just to end, they need to be going outside, okay? I feel like, especially in this lecture, I've given a really strong argument as to why children need to go outside. All children, and 4-year-olds is no exception, okay? They need to go outside. They need to be able to play big. They need to be able to climb, run, take healthy risks, use their imagination, okay? They need to go outside, all right? So that is the end of the 4-year-old lecture. We don't have any assignments this week except to work on your research paper. If you would like to do a Zoom Live and go over the research paper, just let me know. Have a great week.